Okay, so we are in the first section of this week's reading, and we're specifically in Alma chapter 5, one of the most popular chapters in the Book of Mormon. A very personal chapter. We are focusing in on verses 14 through 33, which is also referred to as the introspective questions that Alma asks his people to ask themselves. President Russell M. Russell Ballard gave the following counsel in regards to these questions. I need to regularly take time to ask myself, how am I doing? It's kind of like having a personal private interview with yourself. As a guide for me during this private personal review, I like to read and ponder the introspective words found in the 5th chapter of Alma. And so Laura and I, in preparation for this video, we actually didn't talk with each other. We made it a matter of personal pursuit, and we looked and pulled from the many questions which ones touched us. So our discussion today is just to talk about some of the questions in chapter 5 that touched us.
Yeah, so I'll start by doing one. One that I really liked that touched me is, I'm not going to tell you my answer, but I'll tell you why it touched me, is 15. In verse 15 it says, do ye exercise faith in the redemption of him who created you? Do you look forward with an eye of faith? The reason why that touched me was because, we've been hearing a lot about everything that's going on in the world. It's been absolutely crazy, right? Everything has just been flipped upside down, crazy. The world is just kind of in chaos, and with everything happening, I have found myself at times fearful or in doubt of what's going to happen, or scared for raising my kids now, and just thoughts of fear, inadequacy, just all these things going through my mind. But then when I heard this, do you look forward with an eye of faith? And it just made me think about my feelings and how that reflects my testimony and what I'm focusing on in my life. Am I looking forward with fear, or am I looking forward with an eye of faith? And so that was just a question that I kind of had to internalize and evaluate where I stand in my testimony of Christ. And it's like it says, of the redemption of him who created us, and how that is carrying me through this time.
It's just, as Laura was sharing that, that's the beauty of personal study. And why we are commanded to be feasting upon the words always. Because I love how this specific phrase touched you in such a way according to the life that you're living right now. Yeah. And it's just, if Laura had read this chapter, which I'm sure she has before, it wouldn't have had the impact that it had today as she was reading it. And so I think that's just one of my favorite questions in this chapter is verse 26. Can ye feel so now? Having wonderful experiences in the past is good, and I do believe in journal writing. I do believe in remembering. We're commanded in the Book of Mormon itself, remember. But all is great to think about those beautiful building blocks and stepping stones that get us to where we are today. But if we just stop, if we think, okay, we've gotten to a point when I can kind of sail, I've got my spirituality, I've got my testimony. I just love the invitation of Alma, can ye feel so now? Alma having this wonderful conversion where an angel appears to him and he's rebuked and he repents and he has this mighty change of heart. But still, for him to ask that question, that doesn't matter. It's can ye feel so now? Am I having personal revelatory and spiritual experiences today? Made me think of that.
I like that. I also like, because it's progression. Can you feel so now? Are you progressing? Contentment is not of God. And if we're feeling all is well in Zion, it's probably something that you need to think about and work on, as well as ourselves. Can you feel that change? Because it's a change. The gospel is change. Yeah. It's becoming like Christ. It's changing who you are. Continual change. Yeah. And so just remembering that that's happening constantly, and that should be happening constantly, I think that, like you said, is really important.
What other questions stood out to you?
I liked in verse 19, it says, I say unto you, can you look up, having the image of God engraven upon your countenances? And I like that because I've always loved the phrase, I guess, looking up, to look up. I used to have on this wall behind us an arrow pointing up for that, just to remind me to look up, because it's so easy, I feel like, to look down and to focus on the here and now, the little things, the worldly things, and to get so caught up in that our eternal eyes are blinded. But when we look up and focus on the eternal, focus on Christ, focus on God and the things that really matter, we are able to really take that image of God upon our countenances and be who He really wants to be. His light is able to shine through us if we are open, to Him, to looking up to Him. And it just reminded me of the scripture. It goes along with just having His image in your countenance. Peter found it. It's in Moroni 7, chapter 48, where it says, let's see, that ye may become the sons of God, that when He shall appear, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. And I've always liked that. We will know Christ because we will be like Him. His image will be within our countenances, and light attracts light. And I just love that thought. Like, where are you with that? Are you looking up? Are you being Christ-like? Are you following Jesus?
I had a chance just last night, actually, to be in a temple preparation course, and it was on symbols. And we were looking at pictures of temples and trying to identify symbols that we can see on the outside of the temple. And that was a comment that came up in that lesson, was the spears of temple, the pointing up, and just it really is a cool thought. One thing, I think I've shared this before. Patriarchal blessings are typically pretty private, but there's certain aspects of my blessing that I keep pretty personal, but there's others that I share often, because I think we can learn from each other in different things. But I'm commanded in my patriarchal blessing 4 times, not once, not twice, 4 times, and twice in the same sentence, but to be humble. And I remember most of my life just kind of taking that almost as like a little jab from God, just kind of like, be humble, be humble, don't be prideful. And it wasn't until actually Sister Eldridge gave a talk in our ward, and she said that in her patriarchal blessing, she's commanded 4 times to be humble. And then I was like, okay, if I'm in the same...
You're in pretty good company.
If I'm in the same company as Sister Eldridge, we're good. But I love this question. It's actually one of the last questions that Alma asks, and he says, could ye say, if you were called to die at this time within yourselves, that ye have been sufficiently humble? I think I've probably brought up humility more in these videos than any other gospel principle, but the more and more I ponder it, humility brings the greatest powers of heaven. What is, we are trying to define the word worthy. I feel like worthiness is often misinterpreted or misunderstood. And one definition that we kind of liked as we were talking about it was that worthiness is when you have a dependence on Christ. What makes us worthy? What makes us clean? What makes us pure? When we are with Christ. Just like that scripture that Laura said. How will we be when we meet Christ? We will be like Him. And that's when the reception is glorious. Why? Because we've relied on Him. We've gone to Him. We've utilized His atonement. We've utilized His perfection to help ourselves and to be there. Humility is such a powerful principle.
I think it just came to me now, that picture of Christ knocking on the door without a door handle. For me, I feel like humility is what opens the door. Like, I feel like that's the power that opens the door to let Christ into our lives and to have that change.
Will you look and live? Will you knock? Will you open the door and will He knock?
Yeah. And also using that humility to actually really ask yourself these questions. To be humble enough to look within yourself and see where you are and where you need to go.
So we'd love to learn. If you guys have any questions that stood out to you, I think I heard one time it was like 47 questions in these verses. We'd love to hear your thoughts of which ones touched you and what taught you lessons that maybe you didn't receive before.